So hi guys, it's Agri tea. So first to begin, you may notice I look a little bit different today. I don't have my hat on, don't have my gloves on, I'm not in my normal garden attire, but nonetheless still here in the garden doing what I need to do. So we have pretty good weather today. The sun is out, blazing, still grateful because sometimes it could even be worse than the sun. Tends to be pretty hot. So today I want to show you how Agri tea determines the maturation period for her corn, how she harvests corn, what are the maturation indices, and then how we basically market them. So stay tuned. Okay, so this is Agri tea's field of corn. Before I even proceed further, I just have two disclaimers. One, it's a pretty highly windy day, as predicted by the weather forecast. It's pretty windy, so you know, nature is doing what she does best, but it may affect the audio in a negative way. But don't be despaired, we still have this covered, right? Secondly, I tend to be very authentic to myself. Agri tea is one that's true to herself, and she tends to be of great authenticity. So a part of being true to oneself is that I acknowledge that at some point in time you may have weeds in your garden, right? Don't be despaired. I have implemented a special weed eradication program. My garden, very rare, tends to be so much of weed population, right? We tend to keep weeds away because it could be very hazardous to the plant, harboring insects and unwanted bacteria and fungal microbes. So apart from that, as I was saying, you know, we tend to be very true to ourselves in terms of weeds are going to be there. Right now, the reason as to why my cornfield has a lot of weeds is that, let's say probably in the next 2 weeks, a lot of corn would be coming into not maturation but that peak time for harvesting, right? Because you don't want your kernels to be hard. It would be a very terrible process. We don't want that, so we're trying to keep away from missing the harvesting period, right? So in about 1 or 2 weeks, 2 weeks max, majority of the corn would be ready for harvesting. So it doesn't really make much of a difference to necessarily eradicate the weeds right about now, because after the corn is out, 4 crates of cucumber is going to be planted. So at this stage, the physiological stage at which this cornfield is at, the weeds does not necessarily affect the growth and the productivity of the cornfield. So after saying a mouthful, let's get right into it. Now that is out of the way, let's get right to it. So what I'm about to show and demonstrate are basically different physiological stages of the corn. So the very first stage I would not be able to show, or I can make a brief demonstration about it. The very first stage is when the corn itself is without the tassel. This here string-like structure that you're seeing here is called the tassel, right? And the tassel actually is basically an accumulation of each strand which is attached to one kernel inside of the entire corn, right? So the very first stage would be the emergence of this green structure here alone, right? That's the very first stage. The second stage, which I can demonstrate, would be the emergence of the tassel. Now the color of the tassel is very important. This shows a very light green coloration. This is very young. This is basically just the cob, and the cob doesn't have any kernels just yet, so it's basically just bare right about now inside the enclosure, right? As the corn continues to grow and reaches that harvested period, which is most desirable, again, as I said before, the color of the tassel is very important. So if you look at this coloration of this tassel, you would see that it would have changed from completely light green to a slight pinkish hue. Now the color of this tassel actually varies with each variety, right? Locally we would have the sweet corn. We have different varying varieties, but locally you may not necessarily see that color variation. For some varieties outside, let's say within the Caribbean or even abroad, in terms of European countries, the United States, you know, you may see that even though this corn is big, the tassel coloration actually may still be green. So the color variation actually, it's very different for each variety. So this is the second stage in your growing process for the corn. So as we move across and through the cornfield, you would see a major difference. So this is like about the third physiological stage. The previous section would have showed you a tassel that is just slightly pinkish, you know, nothing to really talk about. In this corn, as it increases in girth, as it increases in length as well, you see that the tassel has moved from that light greenish area to a now deep pinkish reddish hue, which actually shows that it's growing pretty well, right? Now we will move to even a detailed or a different physiological stage. Right, so as we arrive to the fourth physiological stage, we need to pay particular attention to the size of the corn. Look at that. That is pretty large in comparison to what was previously demonstrated, right? So, and taking into consideration the color of the tassel, it's no longer green, it's no longer deep red or pinkish, it's more of a light pink red, kind of what we would say a washed out color right about now. So this means that it's progressing on to its harvesting peak. As we continue to move onward, now this shows a dramatic difference. This is completely brown. The tassel coloration is completely brown, and look at the size of this corn, right? It isn't fully mature just yet, right? We could use the number one indication, which is the coloration of the tassel, right? It isn't fully mature, well, not mature, right, reaching that stage for optimum picking. It hasn't reached that stage just about yet, but it's on its way. Well, finally, I can only demonstrate to you what I have within my garden. This still isn't completely mature, right, because you can still see that kind of greenish, yellowish, basically pale color of the tassel close to the mouth of the corn in comparison to the rest, right? Now, another good indication that you can use to measure to see if your corn is mature, sometimes you could do a physical identification. Now, what I tend to do sometimes, I tend to just gently press, not too hard, gently press the tip of the corn. In pressing the tip of the corn, I am feeling for either feeling for if it is pointy or if it's rounded. Now, if it is pointy, as demonstrated, I mean, I have a good idea as to what I'm feeling right about now. If it's pointy, that means that the corn kernels have not fully matured, well, not matured, but filled up within this area. Now, corn kernels tend to fill up from the base upward. So if it is that you feel that pointed area, that basically demonstrates that these kernels are not yet full or ripe, as some people would say, right? And that will give you a good indication as to what is at the base, at the middle, and onward. So sometimes if I'm quite unsure, I tend to give it a gentle peel back, not all the way down, because I mean this would expose it to the elements and to, you know, pesky bugs and insects, and that would basically render your cob unmarketable. So what I tend to do sometimes if I'm quite unsure, I just give it a gentle peel back Nothing too exasperated or anything like that. Just to check the developmental process of my cob. Right? So we can see, firstly, we're seeing that when we strip it back, we're able to see that the tassel, which is all of these are connected to one of the kernel. It's not green, it's not yellow, it actually changes downward there. So if you just, just bring this apart a little bit, you can see that there are some kernels there. However, these kernels are not necessarily filled up the way how you may want it. You can do a simple test as well to know if it is that, you could go ahead to harvest or not. Sometimes what you can do, if you have a sharp object, like a knife, or if you have pretty good fingernails, you could just simply peel it backward and you can just simply pierce it. Pierce one of the kernels. Now, you have to consider there are three identification methods in piercing the corn kernel. Firstly is, if it is that you pierce one kernel and you see that there is a liquid, but that liquid is white, well, not white, sorry, clear. If it is that you see that that liquid is clear, it means that your kernels are pretty young and they have not ripened just yet. If it is that you pierce and you get a creamy, milky substance, it means that you have reached your harvest peak, and that is the time that you should take your corn off of the trees. If it is that you pierce and you do not get any substance at all, that means that your kernels have passed the optimum time to harvest and it's no longer marketable. So what we're going to do with this, we're going to simply get this back in accordance. And what I tend to do sometimes, I would use electrical tape. Trinidad and Tobago, we know what electrical tape is, and we'd simply seal this off. Right, so momentarily we see that there are fruit flies already coming to pester that that corn there, right, because it's exposed, and corn tend to has a very sweet aroma, right? So to prevent any spoilage or anything like that, we're going to just seal this up with electrical tape. That's what I tend to do to prevent any water, preventing spoilage, bugs, insects, undesirable elements. Alright guys, so that's it for Agri Tea and another resilient video for today. Click the subscribe button so you would know when again Agri Tea uploads. Remember, corn is a pretty resilient corn. It's pretty low maintenance as well, and it does not take a lot of resources and raw materials to actually produce this crop. So whether you're doing it on a commercial scale or you're doing it for fun or in your backyard garden, you could actually employ some of these tips, know when to harvest or when your harvest period has actually passed on by. Stay tuned, subscribe. Bye!